So now we're officially moving into our first of our 4 panels, discussing leadership in the Asian art world from a variety of different perspectives. First of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sheila Canby, Curator Emerita from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Sheila has had a long and distinguished career as a curator and museum professional. From 2009 to 2019, she served as curator in charge of Islamic art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. From 1991 to 2009, she was curator of Islamic art and antiquities at the British Museum. And before joining the BM, Dr. Canby curated Islamic collections in several museums in the US, including the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and the Brooklyn Museum. Dr. Canby has written numerous publications, more than I could really list here in this short introduction, but some highlights include Islamic Art Close Up, published in 2015, Shah Abbas and the Imperial Treasures of Iran, published in 2009, Hunt for Paradise, Courts of Safavid Iran, 1501 to 76, published in 2003, and the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp in 2011 and again in 2014. So Dr. Canby, thank you very much for joining us and being a part of this panel in a discussion on leadership in the Asian art world. And of course, our third panelist is Dr. Heather Elgood, who really at this stage requires no introduction, but I'd just like to speak to a few of her accomplishments, which we haven't yet had the chance to comment on here. So we kind of hear a bit more about her background and publications that perhaps she has not touched on herself, being so modest and reticent so often. So in addition to being the founder and director emerita of our program, she is a specialist in the religious and ritual arts of Hindu and Buddhist India, in Indian Buddhist wall painting, in Pala Buddhist illustrated manuscripts of the 15th to 18th centuries, and in Indo-Islamic, Jain, and Hindu manuscript illustration. She has several publications, including Hinduism and the Religious Arts, published in London in 1999, The Roots of Village Hinduism, in World Archaeology, published in 2004, and has contributed to the seminal textbook, contributed to this seminal textbook, and a handbook on the study of Hinduism, edited by Sushil Mittal and Jean Thursby. Dr. Elgood was awarded an MBE for services to higher education and the arts in 2015 on the New Year's Honours List, published on Tuesday, 30th of December, 2014. And today, Hetty, we're delighted that you've made the time and decided to contribute to one of these panels today, so we can hear more on your formative and transformative vision for education in Asian art history and archaeology at the postgraduate diploma in Asian art. So thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. And as the chair, I'd like to invite each of you to give a presentation or a short discussion, if you will, on what the core values of leadership are to you in your particular area of the Asian art field.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here in this celebration of our friend and mentor of many of you, your teacher, Hetty. Now, I'm going to say a couple of words because Hetty and I have known each other for many decades. We met when we were students in the 1970s. And then when my family and I moved to London, we became fast friends. Our families in various generations became fast friends. And I feel that as her friend, I experienced the ups and downs of the course in those days. And I just marvel at Hetty's resilience and her ability to overcome obstacles and her generous friendship and support of the people around her. I think she kept it going, and that in itself deserves a huge amount of praise. Not only that, but of course, look at you all, the products of the course and how enriching it has been for you. So unlike the art historian that I am, I'm not going to show any slides because what I'm going to talk about is two people who are both deceased and were leaders in the field of Asian art. Not in my own specific field, which is Islamic art, but in other fields of Asian art. One was a professor, the other was a curator and museum director. So who are they? The first person I'm going to talk about is Professor John Rosenfield, who was professor of Japanese art at Harvard University, and he died in 2013. And the other is Dr. Jan Fontaine, who was a curator and then director of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and he died in 2017. So we were asked to come up, as Chin Chin did, with a few words to kind of encapsulate the subject or people we were talking about. And so for Rosenfield, I would say that he was inspiring, he was deeply knowledgeable, and he was generous. Now, all right, who was John Rosenfield? Well, his introduction to Asia began in World War II, when he went to serve in India and Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia in military intelligence. After the war, of course, he returned and he went and studied to be an artist. But then the Korean War happened, and so he went back into military service, and this time he went to Korea and Japan. That seems to have caught his imagination and intention. So when he came back, he enrolled in Harvard in the PhD program to study Asian art, and wrote his thesis on the Kushan Kings which was published in the 1960s. In 1965, he joined the Harvard faculty as the specialist in Japanese art. Well, John Rosenfield, of course, had a kind of pan-Asian education, having served and lived in South Asia and East Asia. But in his field of Japanese art, he wrote foundational studies of Japanese sculpture, and he organized exhibitions in the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard. So he had the sort of two strands. But what made him so special was the combination of his sort of approachability as a teacher and his unassuming manner, all the while with so much, knowledge that he had. He was never intimidating. Rather, he kind of radiated this knowledgeable humility. He challenged his students by opening doors to Asian art, and to religion and to history. And we all wanted to pass through them and learn, even if it wasn't going to be our area of specialization. So he retired in 1991, but he continued to produce exemplary scholarship. For me, and maybe some of you were there too, one of the most profound lectures I ever attended was given by John Rosenfield in London, I think around 2008. He spoke of the sculpture portrait of a 12th century monk called Shinjuku Chogen. As several scholars of Japanese art wrote in a memoriam of John Rosenfield, he had, quote, a remarkable ability to describe with precision three-dimensional forms and work outwards from artworks to complex ideas of Buddhist philosophy. By then, he, of course, in 2008, was old himself, in his 80s. But by then, John Rosenfield was able to channel a lifetime of knowledge into that 1 hour talk, where he connected materiality and spirituality in a way that few others could do. And I think, just going back to the Asian art course at SOAS, that the emphasis on the object, the work of art, and using that as the starting point for all this other learning that you can do, or this deep experience that you can have, is something that John Rosenfield really embodied. He understood how to do that. And for his students, there are people like Tim Clark at the British Museum, that really set them on a path of discovery and of deepening the understanding of all of us, visitors, students, and the like, in the subject. So when I turn to Jan Fontaine, he also lived a long life, and but he started out not in the United States, but in the Netherlands. He was born about 15 miles from Amsterdam, attended Leiden University as an undergraduate, where he studied Chinese and Japanese literature. He told me a story that when he was 18, he went to the professor of Chinese at Leiden, and the man asked him, well, how old are you? And he said, 18. And the man said, well, you're starting to learn Chinese 18 years too late. But he carried on and persevered. And that led in 1953, after he got his BA, to him getting his PhD from Leiden in the art of China and Japan and the art and archaeology of Southeast Asia. He then went to work in the Museum of Asiatic Art, sort of connected to the Rijksmuseum. And in 1966, he moved to Boston to become curator of the Asiatic department at the Museum of Fine Arts, which is where I encountered him a few years later. In 1976, he became director of the MFA, and the words I would use to characterize him are energy, curiosity, and knowledge. Now, museum work in many ways is more kinetic than university teaching. One has to walk, long distances through galleries, or even just to get to somebody else's office and other wings, or to go to distant storerooms. And that's not to mention leaning into or climbing into cases to adjust labels or objects in the case or whatever. In those days, it wasn't all so structured. We all did all of that. And Fontaine never shied away from that. So his co-workers would trot alongside him, discussing the work at hand or listening to stories about how the MFA's Asian collections were amassed or who built them, that kind of thing. I mean, he was a born teacher, but in a hands-on fashion where the craft of museum display, storage, and administration of collections was interwoven with information about the history of art. Many undergraduates in art history, especially in the US, at least, have little or no opportunity to handle objects or view them except in museum galleries. And I'm not putting down museum galleries, but it's not the same thing as holding something in your hands or touching a shard and feeling what it feels like. So those who take jobs in curatorial departments right out of university have a steep learning curve. Mr. Fontaine and the curators in his department not only trained younger staff how to handle 2- and 3-dimensional Asian works of art, but he also discussed their art historical importance and the importance of those objects to the MFA's collection. And I have to say that, I mean, in the late 20th century, the MFA's Asian collection was preeminent in the United States, probably because in the 19th century, the China trade had meant all these Bostonians going to East Asia and then coming back with wonderful works of art. So to go back to Fontaine, while he was collaborative and he worked closely with colleagues on special exhibitions and as director on large building and fundraising projects, he also encouraged staff to follow their interests and add to their knowledge. This could mean curating installations of art from the museum's collection, especially in areas where there wasn't an expert. The young ones would be allowed to put up the Rajput paintings, for example, because unfortunately Ananda Kumaraswamy wasn't there anymore. Or we could do inventories of works of art in storage. But what Fontaine understood was the impact of direct encounters with exceptional works of art and how a young colleague could get hooked on museum work through these experiences. Both John Rosenfield and Jan Fontaine led in their fields thanks to a combination of excellent qualities that enabled them to share their knowledge generously and attract people whether students or museum visitors, through their charismatic ability to communicate their love and understanding of their subjects in an appealing and unassuming way. I think those qualities of reaching out to people and touching them in a place that, you know, many other ways of communication don't get to, really set those men apart. And I thank them for having known them and having learned so much from them.
Sheila, thank you so much for your reminiscences, your thoughts on those wonderful kind of verbal portraits, if you will, of these two giants in their respective fields. I think we're definitely seeing a core theme emerging here of communication and also listening as a key feature of leadership, whether in research and scholarship and curation or in the management of cultural centres and institutions. And with that, that kind of prefacing kind of series of points in mind, I'd like to hand over to you, Hetty, as our third and final speaker on this panel.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you first, Chin Chin and Sheila, for giving such an intimate sense of what was important to both of you in terms of leadership in relation to the Asian arts. Today, I just want to briefly talk about two aspects. First of all, I want to talk about the important key qualities for effective leadership in the Asian art world, which was a challenge that Malcolm gave all of us. And I want to talk about first the role of my relationship to educating Asian art in the context of the diploma. And then I want to talk about the second part, which is what my interpretation is of that challenge in relation to what I feel my leadership qualities have been in relation to the program more administratively. If I could have the next slide, please. I start with, just for amusement, but also a very important person to evoke at the beginning of all occasions, to remove obstacles, and also to show you how important what Naman said was to me in my teaching of art. And that is the importance of context. Naman very clearly said that we should consider even more deeply in our teaching the importance of context. Well, this is a panel Robert and I had made for us by the potters of the Malaya community outside Udaipur in Rajasthan. That's me offering and indeed consecrating with incense and all the other appropriate words that I should say to him. And indeed, he sits here in my library behind me, just behind me here. In fact, I can show you him. There he is, sitting here calmly, looking after us, and we move him from place to place. So I start with him. Sorry, Malcolm, if you could, next slide, please. So what did I look for in the lecturers who have participated with me in the teaching of Asian art? Well, first of all, of course, we've talked endlessly about the importance of the object, understanding that dynamic, giving the experience of the sensory aspect of the object as much as possible. I remember Iran Momtaz, who spoke today so sweetly, saying her thanks to me. I remember, I never forget her saying how as a child, she grew up with these Islamic ceramics and understood even her father talked to her about not only the tactile relationship, but the smell of an object. I've never forgotten that. And of course, to give equal emphasis to the decorative as well as the fine arts. We need to leave aside what we consider a fine object in inverted commas. Secondly, Naman mentioned this importance of context, very much driving through all my interest in Asian art, in all the material, is my deep sense of my religious interests. And this has been fundamental to my relationship to the historical, religious, and cultural context of the object. And then, of course, the ability for our lecturers to actually communicate, to convey a love and passion for their subject, which of course they know well, but it's that ability to communicate that energy of love, which is so fundamental. Next slide, please, Malcolm. And here am I, thanks to the British Museum, who permits us to go and look at, here we're looking at a whole range of Indian painting and testing all of you. I would challenge all of you to first of all start by seeing if you could remember what the object is, and then define why you think it is what it is from a more connoisseurship perspective. Yes, it is true. We haven't forgotten that rather old-fashioned term, and I'm grateful that Nama mentioned it. Next slide, please. And here we have Professor Whitfield, Roderick, as we know him, really amazingly strong and one of the greatest scholars knowledgeable about the collection of material from Dunhuang that we are able to get the students to go and look at. It's remarkable that we are able to do that. And I'm very grateful to Roderick for again, communicating his deep love and understanding of the collection. Next one, please. So what do we look for in an object? What does it represent? How do we recognize it? And of course, the context. Next one, please. For a sort of starting point, I've actually used one of my slides of describing this particular object in the British Museum, showing you the kind of things of connoisseurship which we ask the students to respond to in, let's say, a revision session. So this mottled sandstone, anybody who's done the India module knows immediately what it is, but it is a female tree spirit. And many of you who know me know how passionate I am about the way in which the worship of the tree spirit has been fundamental in terms of continuities, going right back to 3rd century BC and earlier, pre-Buddhist, and the way in which the tree spirit was absorbed into both Jainism and, of course, Buddhism as part of its iconography, as part of its protection to the great stupas. Here we have this voluptuous goddess, here from the 1st century AD, representing my interest, deep interest in the yakshi, and in this particular moment, breaking the branch of the tree, the shal tree, Panchika, to breaking the branch of the shal tree, kicking it with her foot, arousing the tree. And of course, Buddha appears in such a moment, in such a ceremony, in a village context, and she comes down and worships Buddha. So it becomes incorporated into the Buddhist story. Next one, please. And when we look at the object in our virtual times, we're able to go very close in to consider all the various aspects, the incredible jewelry, the shape of the face, the prominence of the breasts, the shape of the hips, all of those things. Next one, please. And we can see here another object from the British Museum. Again, here again, we have another interpretation of this yakshi. Here, her necklace falls between her breasts. The tree and the sense of the 3rd dimension of the sculpture becomes more defined, more lithe, graceful, sensuous, as I express, revealing her lower area in a way with very fine muslin than we saw earlier. Next slide, please. And again, we go very close to the object to try and define, and the different color of the stone, all of these things becomes part of the experience of the student. Next one, please. But continuities exist. Taking, for example, this element of the yakshi, the tree spirit. She also becomes Maya, the mother of the Buddha, breaking the branch in the Lumbini forest and giving birth to Buddha from her side. So again, the idea of the tree spirit becomes part of the Buddhist story. Next one, please. And here, the interpretation, the importance of the tree spirit still remains common. I've always been interested in this ethnoarchaeology that is potentially still alive and represents in India the extraordinary continuities that still exist. I'm grateful to Stephen Hyler, who's author of Village India, a remarkable photographer, went and traveled in remote Orissa in places I'm afraid I've never seen. And here we have this local priest making offerings in the fire to this remarkable tree goddess, adorned as she should be with red, with marigolds, and as you can see, painted and even earringed as part of the projection from the actual trunk of the tree. Next one, please. And continuing this theme of the goddess here, here we see this remarkable image of Durga treading on the buffalo demon. Durga inside the shrine of the Satyamata temple in Ossia in Rajasthan, dated between the 9th and the 12th century. What is significant about this image is that it's as much not about its definition or perfection as a museum object, but in its power, in the belief and the dynamic relation of the worshippers, of the ritual practice, of their worship, and their relationship with this image. And that we know by the touches of saffron on her forehead, or turmeric, sorry, to cool the heat of that goddess. And the cotton that has been attached to the image, which comes with requests or gratitude to the goddess. It is this dynamic relationship, this performative relationship of ritual worshipper and the image, not in its definition. It is this live relationship that I've always tried to hold and convey to the students of our objects. Next one, please. And in a very different world and in a very different sense, here we have a more Europeanized portrait of one of the great gods of Hinduism, Shiva, done with great sensitivity by possibly, most definitely, probably, Hindu artist working for Akbar, the great Mughal Akbar, in his court, as I say, inspired by European portraiture, this Mughal 16th century, remarkably sensitive portrait of Shiva, one of my great loves, from in the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin. I can't resist including it. And we can see as we look at it, there's a sense of delicacy in the way he sits. He's blue, which again links to the idea of the nature of Shiva, although often he should be white rather than blue. And looking into the far distance, we can see the atmospheric perspective of the Italian ways in which the Europeans depict further landscape. And of course, Shiva has all his attributes, crescent moon, the snake, the bull by which he sits. So iconographically, it is correct. Next one, please. And so finally, to cut this short, what are my 3 leadership principles in terms of the administration as course director? First of all, something I've spoken of in my speech, my valuation of the individual student, the lecturer, or my colleagues, to value all that work with us. Secondly, belonging, to give to my colleagues a sense of ownership of the course. So in a way, it was as much theirs as it was mine. And finally, we've all talked about listening, communication, to encourage all to participate and learn from each other. And this has been very much my principle in the classroom, in the office, so that we don't have a sort of hierarchy. We all have a voice. So with that, I would like to end and thank all of you for participating today in this leadership question.
Hetty, thank you so much for your thoughts, your insights, and your reflections in detail on the course. I mean, I think we're very privileged and very, all of us are very happy to have the chance to see you speak to the objects and to speak about how that object focus approach has shaped and impacted the kind of leadership you've provided for this program over the decades. I'd like to thank Hetty once again, to thank Sheila and Chin for their contributions, and really to reiterate that kind of core message that seems to have come from all three presentations. That the values of leadership we've heard espoused today in various different contexts seem to be centered not on carving a singular path as an individual, but on a particular kind of openness, generosity, and humility. Indeed, an ability to clearly communicate with those around you, and perhaps more importantly, to listen. So with that in mind, we'll bring this panel to a close. Thank you once again to our speakers today. We'll now be beginning the next panel on curating, collecting, and conserving Asian art in around 15 minutes at 2:20 UK time. So thank you all very much for joining us. We'll see you again shortly. Thanks.